The guard knew very well that she was the one who started the madness earlier and was afraid she would do it again. This was his personal retreat, and he had always asked her to respect his solitude. But circumstances had changed, and she no longer had a choice but to face the remnants of his presence and organize his belongings. As Audrey sifted through the contents of the drawer, she spotted some odd-looking documents. At a first glance, they seemed out of place, as if they didn't really belong to her husband. However, as she continued reading, clues started to connect. Her mind buzzed with a growing list of questions as the shocking realization dawned on her husband might have been hiding something from her. A feeling of despair hit Audrey as she felt the thought of her husband being dishonest growing. Yet she didn't want to jump to conclusions too hastily. Little did she realize she was on the brink of unveiling more layers to this mystery. But the questions lingered. What exactly was her husband hiding? What were the strange findings in the drawer? How was she going to unearth the whole truth? Audrey had always adored her husband and considered him as the kindest and most truthful man she had ever known in her life. They had always lived a simple, modest life with not a lot of money to their name. But recently it turned out that he hadn't told Audrey the whole truth about his past. Their remarkable story was initiated in a local bar, where they came quite often and where they first locked eyes more than 60 years ago. Audrey and Glyndwr were just young adults then, but from the moment they met, it was an instantaneous connection. This was a defining moment in Audrey's life that would change forever. When Glenn first approached Audrey, she had a feeling that he had something mysterious about him. But apart from this mysterious feeling, Audrey also felt a swift sense of comfort around him. She found herself captivated by the deep blue hue of his eyes and the way he looked at her. And more importantly, above everything, she immediately felt very safe when she was with him. Audrey and Glenn were both more in love than they had ever been. Whenever they could, they would spend quality time together, going on adventurous dates around town, and occasionally sneaking off for private get-togethers. Life with Glenn was filled with thrill and excitement for Audrey, but more than anything, it offered her stability. Although Glenn had a habit of disappearing for his hobbies, she was never left feeling alone or unloved. As their love story evolved, Audrey and Glenn grew closer, and before long they became a happily married couple. They were inseparable and deeply in tune with each other throughout their life journey. Audrey had always believed that she understood her husband better than anyone else. Yet after a few months of marital bliss, a significant announcement from the doctor altered their lives forever. The initial phase of their marital bliss was marked by a sudden health concern. Audrey had begun experiencing mild, persistent pain, which led her to seek medical advice. The doctor's visit was unexpected and timely, as Glenn had just returned from one of his mysterious excursions when this incident took place. As they sat in the doctor's office, the professional looked at them with a certain gravity. He was about to deliver news that would dramatically alter the course of their lives. In time, the doctor revealed the incredible news: Audrey and Glenn were soon to become parents. So after another couple of months, they joyously welcomed their son Jake into their lives. Their happiness was full, even though Glenn's work often demanded long hours away from home. Audrey found herself in the dark about his activities, yet she reveled in their shared joy of parenthood. Despite his mysterious trips, Glenn was undeniably a family man at heart. His love for his wife and child never changed, even when he was away on his ventures. He was a loving father and a dedicated husband. Audrey would sometimes ponder over his secretive trips, curious about the nature of his work. But Glenn always returned home, eager to help with their son. Their calm life, however, was soon to be disrupted by an unexpected twist. Glenn and Audrey's seemingly peaceful life was soon interrupted by an unforeseen conflict. One day, Glenn headed out for a walk. It wasn't unusual for him to do so, and so Audrey didn't think much of it. But when he returned, he looked frazzled and worried. He insisted that he and Audrey would have to move to a different location, and soon. He said they would have to leave in less than a week. The sudden demand to move left Audrey feeling disoriented and upset. The town they lived in was home to all her friends and loved ones. Night after night she lay awake, wondering what could have possibly prompted Glenn to react so dramatically. Audrey found herself at the crossroads, facing a difficult decision. In the midst of the conflict came a new pressing issue that neither Glenn nor Audrey had seen coming. It all happened one evening. Audrey was standing in the doorway trying to explain to Glenn that leaving their town would be a mistake when she felt a piercing pain. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in a hospital, awaiting a surprising revelation. Upon learning that she was expecting again, Audrey was overjoyed at the prospect of bringing a beautiful baby girl into the world. However, the situation was far from straightforward. Due to complications and lack of medical advancement, having the baby would mean that the young couple would need to prepare for the likelihood of never having children again. The couple was left to grapple with this monumental decision. The desire to have the baby was enormously strong in Audrey, but at the same time she was very uncertain about Glenn's feelings on the matter. He was behaving a bit odd lately, and as he had told her less than a week ago, he wanted them to move to a different location as soon as possible. Still, she knew she had to bring it up, and decided to initiate the conversation. To her relief, he immediately told her that he felt the same way as Audrey and that he wanted to keep the baby as well. He loved her and Jake so much, and it had always been a big dream of him of having both a son and a daughter. Audrey was so happy to hear this, and she was excited to become a mother a second time. Audrey and Glenn made the decision to proceed with the pregnancy, but that meant putting off the move for now. Due to the high-risk nature of Audrey's pregnancy, traveling was deemed risky. Audrey could tell that Glenn was disappointed and worried about not being able to leave, but he turned his focus to something else. Glenn poured his energy into caring for his growing family. As Audrey was bedridden due to the complications, he took up the mantle of their son's primary caregiver. Audrey noticed that his mysterious trips seemed to be less frequent, and one day, to Audrey's surprise, Glenn came into the room because he had very important news to pass on to her. Glenn had a change of heart and no longer wanted their family to move. His reason was that while helping Audrey take care of their 2 children, he realized that it was not easy raising 2 children and that they would need all the support they could get. Audrey found his reason a bit questionable but chose not to talk about it for now. She decided to let it be for the time being, content with their current circumstances. The couple went on to live a happy life together, nurturing their children and celebrating their unwavering love for each other. Their happiness was so profound that 5 decades seemed to pass in a blink of an eye. Their marriage was the strongest it had ever been, but soon their world would be shaken by some troubling signs. As the years passed and the couple got older, Glenn's health started getting worse. His hands often began to shake uncontrollably, and he had more and more difficulty walking. Of course, it is normal for your body to change and your health to decline at this age, but for Glenn it became so extreme that he started having problems completing even the simplest daily tasks. After Glenn suffered trembling hands and problems with moving, Glenn decided to seek medical help. He went to a doctor who brought him the news that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It broke Audrey's heart to hear that her husband had Parkinson's disease. But realizing that her beloved husband was grappling with such a severe condition, she vowed to cherish every moment they had left together. With a heart set on making the most of their remaining time together, Audrey and Glenn came together and strived to fill their days with precious memories. The couple often saw their children and grandchildren, and they immensely enjoyed every minute they spent with all of them. Tragically, Glyndwar's health continued to decline at an alarming rate, and he was very much aware that his time was running out. There was one thing that Glyndwr simply couldn't shake from his thoughts. Should he finally come clean with his wife and tell her about his big secret? Or should he keep it from her, as a way of protecting her? This thought kept following him until the very end of his life. He, unfortunately, passed away in 2015 and took his major secret to his grave with him. But little did he know that it wouldn't remain there forever. In the wake of his demise, Glenn left behind a trail of grief-stricken loved ones who all came from various places to pay their respects. He was always known to his loved ones as a loving family man who worked almost his entire life as a civil engineer. But despite the love and respect he commanded, it seemed that every single one of them had the wrong perception of him. The bond between Audrey and Glenn was truly exceptional. They had been lovers and partners for over 6 decades, making them true soulmates. So naturally, Audrey grappled with the heart-rending loss of her husband. She obviously had a lot of trouble dealing with his death, but she had no idea that it would only get harder after she discovered his secret. Because Audrey was having so much trouble dealing with the death of her husband, Glenn, she couldn't get it over her head to clean up his belongings. Even his clothes still hung in the exact same place in the closet as the final days before his death. However, she knew this could not go on indefinitely. It was a daunting task she would have to confront eventually, no matter how hard it was to move on. Eventually, 3 years after his death, Audrey gathered the courage to clean up his belongings. It was very emotional for Audrey, because while cleaning up, all the memories that she made together with her lovely husband came up. Even though cleaning up Glyndwar's stuff was an emotional roller coaster for her, she had managed to clean up almost everything in the house that belonged to Glyndwr, and only kept the few items that she truly was unable to throw out. Only one drawer was left. This drawer belonged to Glenn and was located in his personal office, where he indulged in his love for writing. Besides his work as a civil engineer, Glenn had a passion for writing many things. He often retreated to his office and then wrote poems and novels to clear his head. But would it be these poems and stories that Audrey would find in the drawer? Audrey would soon find out. Although Audrey and Guingouer have been together for more than 60 years and shared basically everything they ever had, she never had a look into this drawer and was wondering what she would encounter. The two shared everything and knew everything about each other, but this was the one thing Audrey had never actually looked into or known about, so she was very curious. She decided that it was time for her to open the mysterious drawer now. She grabbed the drawer and tried to pull it open, but to her big surprise, it wouldn't move. It was stuck, and upon taking a closer look, Audrey came to the conclusion that the drawer was locked. However, despite the initial disappointment, Audrey was determined to find out what was inside the drawer. Convinced that the key must be somewhere within the office, Audrey scoured the room to no avail. She looked everywhere, but she still couldn't find it. Audrey was on the verge of giving up, so she decided she deserved to take a short break, settling down on the chair behind his desk to rest for a minute. That is the moment when her eye caught something in the room that captured her attention. Audrey's eye fell on a framed picture on Glenn's desk. It was a photograph of the two of them captured on their wedding day. Her eyes welled up with tears as she instantly thought of all the beautiful things they had experienced in their lifetime together. But as she took the frame in her hands to take a closer look at the photo, something unexpected happened. Something fell out of the picture frame. She gasped when she saw what it was: a key. Would this be the key to the locked drawer? She carefully put it into the lock and held her breath when she turned it. To her relief, the drawer clicked right open. She could finally see what was inside. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing its contents. Audrey's eyes widened as she took in the sight. The drawer was filled to the brim with documents, and after taking a look at them, Audrey realized that she had no idea what they were. She thought it was very strange. Glenn had never even mentioned these documents to her, and the weirdest thing of all was that they all contained the same name. But Audrey had never seen or heard this name ever before. Who was this person? And how were they connected to Glenn? She had so many questions. One of the documents she found showed the results of a memory test. The results showed that the boy who had taken the test had an exceptionally good memory, especially in the area of remembering pictures and maps, a so-called photographic memory. Shortly after, she found another remarkable document in the drawer. It was a letter with a statement that the decision was taken to pull the boy out of school. The letter was from the year 1944, and the reason that was given for this rigorous decision was his photographic memory. Audrey realized that the boy only was 13 years old at that time, exactly the same age as her husband Glenn was in 1944. At first she thought it belonged to a school friend of Glenn, but later on she became suspicious. She considered it illogical that a boy should have to leave school because of his good memory. This has something to do with her husband. She continued her search for new information in the documents to find out exactly what was going on and who the boy was. When she had almost reached the bottom of the pile of papers, she came across a document that was even stranger than anything she had seen that day. The document was about a secret operation called XX and a counter-espionage project. She still couldn't place it, and she had no idea what this had to do with her husband. Then she saw a little note with a telephone number. Would this lead to an explanation of all she found? Audrey was suspicious. She knew the phone number was a lead that she had desperately hoped for, but she was nervous to get the truth. Would it shatter her good thoughts of Glenn, or would it make her love her late husband more? Regardless, she knew she would have to make a decision. Audrey thought about it for days, and it soon began to consume her waking hours. For so long, she had debated on what the strange hobby was and why Glenn had never offered up an answer. She even wondered if he would be upset or proud of her for searching for the truth. Eventually, a decision was made. Audrey decided that she had to call the numbers she had found in Glenn's drawer. She picked up her phone, entered the number, and pressed the button to start the call. The phone kept ringing, but nobody picked up. She tried calling another time, but without success. Later that night, Audrey was sitting in her chair in the living room, watching TV, when suddenly she heard a noise. Her phone was ringing. She quickly looked at the screen and recognized the number. It was the same number she had tried calling earlier that day. Audrey's heart was beating in her chest as she answered the phone. She heard a dark, calm voice asking, "Am I speaking with Audrey Phillips?" She answered, "Yes, this is she." She wondered whether she should tell the caller where she had found the number, but she soon understood that wasn't necessary. "Let's meet tomorrow," the man said. "I will explain everything." Audrey had not known what to expect when she first called the number, but this certainly hadn't been it. Who was this man? Did he know Glenn? And how did he even know who she was? She hoped he would be able to tell her more. When the doorbell rang the next day, Audrey knew it was the man she had spoken to on the phone the day before. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a man who was about the same age as her husband Glenn. She had never seen this man before. Who was he? For some reason, she wasn't frightened by him, and so she invited him inside. After she made both of them a cup of tea, they sat down, and the man started talking. The man had known Glenn very well, perhaps even better than she had known him. The man had a very serious and even sad look on his face as he spoke. "Audrey, I have worked with your husband for over 30 years, and there is something important about his life he never told you. Glenn wasn't the man you thought he was." He continued. Glyndwr was a very talented man. He was incredibly smart, which was discovered at a very young age. You know, the times were troubling, and there was a lot of tension in the world. Both he and I were recruited by the army to be trained. But we would not just become soldiers. We were selected for a special program. Only our fathers were allowed to know of this, and we had to keep it secret for everybody we ever met, including you, obviously. We went through all sorts of training programs. We were taught German and had to do memory tests. We were young and normal school was boring, so obviously we wanted to enter this adventure. Although back then, we never really knew what kind of tasks we would have to do and what our lives would look like. We had almost completed our training. When the Second World War started, that's when we received scary news. Glyndwr and I were just 14 years old when we got our first mission. We had to crawl through dirty, long concrete pipes to secretly enter prisons. There we would try to talk to German prisoners of war to try and win their trust and retrieve information from them. We did this for a few years until the war ended. But after the war, Glyndwr and I stayed in touch with our captain. He had something new in mind for us. We had to do more training, and we were never allowed to speak of anything we did. We were trained to lead a double life. We had to find a partner and create a fake identity so it would appear to the outside world that we had normal lives. But in the meantime, we would take part in secret intelligence missions. However, don't imagine we were like James Bond. Our first mission was to help capture 2 spies. We were paid PS-20 if we completed the mission. We had to break into an army camp, keeping an eye on the suspects and making sure these were the right guys. After which we had to report their whereabouts so they could be captured. But some missions were more dangerous. Some missions were getting very dangerous. One time Glyndwr had to extract a fellow spy from a boat to pick up a load of arms. He had to take out the searchlight on one of the 2 gunboats and make sure he nor the other spy was captured. But you'll be surprised when this took place, the man said, smiling. Remember how he was away for a football weekend 3 weeks after you got married? Well, he had to come up with a clever excuse because he came back with big bruises and he was completely sore. So the football weekend lie worked, but he was actually working this secret mission during that weekend. It became obvious to me that Glenn was finding it more and more difficult to continue lying to you. He really loved and respected you and valued your relationship, and he wanted to be honest with you. Sadly, that was never an option. You must understand that we were not allowed to tell anybody else about our secret missions. But then, something bad happened. Do you remember that one time when Glenn had gone out for a walk and he came back all stressed out and worried? I think he told you that you needed to move to another location immediately. From what I remember, you weren't too happy about it, the man said with a playful smile on his face. Well, he was just trying to protect you. Our captain had told him that somebody was close to blowing his cover. This obviously stressed Glenn out because if his real identity were exposed, he would be in grave danger, and so would you and Jake. That is why he wanted to move away so quickly. However, when the 2 of you found out you were expecting another baby, Glenn did everything he could to escape from his life as a spy. He made an agreement with our captain, and luckily, he was able to retire very quickly. All he wanted was to spend more time with you and your children. Audrey was completely in shock and couldn't believe that she hadn't suspected or discovered anything at all in all these years of marriage. Her sweet Glenn was gone now, and he had left her with so many questions to which she might never find an answer. Audrey was still processing everything that the man had told her when he took something out of his pocket. Audrey saw that the man was holding something in his hand. He handed it over to her, and she saw that it was a piece of paper, folded in half a couple of times. It was a handwritten note that her husband had left for her. While Audrey was reading the note, her eyes filled with tears. She just couldn't believe it. This was shocking news. But at least this news was a bit more positive compared to all the rest. The letter started with Glyndwr saying, "My sweet Audrey, where do I begin? If you ever read this, it means you've discovered my biggest secret. I hope you understand why I could never tell you what I did. I did it to keep you safe." As Audrey continued reading, she learned that he had a big surprise for her. Glenn had left her a huge check for the money he had earned as a spy. They always lived a sober but happy life, and it turned out that Glenn had always saved the money he had earned as a spy for when the time would come that he was no longer there. It was a gift for his wife and an apology for lying to her all his life. Audrey thanked the man for bringing her the letter and telling her everything about Glenn's life that he could never tell her himself. The man stayed in touch with Audrey and her family, and whenever they saw each other, they would reminisce about the past. Even though they all knew different versions of Glenn, they all loved him deeply. Audrey is doing great now. She has donated the money to the Veterans Relief, and she is immensely proud of her late husband and others who did similar work. She often tells her grandchildren about Glenn and the secret life of courage he lived, and together the family is doing a great job honoring Glenn's memory.